Our first speaker for this evening of two, we've got Kelly, dear friend Kelly Schulz. Kelly's going to be speaking to us. She's the founder of A11y. She's going to be speaking to us about some super interesting insights that she's been surfacing from some of this multi-factor authentication work that you've been doing. Right, Kel? Give it a crack. All right. Is this a draft preso or is it the real thing? Excellent. Fab.
It's usually why I do presentations. This isn't new.
Welcome to Kelly.
Hello, everybody. Well, I don't have any hands for that. Okay, you can go to the next slide, please. Okay. They have to match what's on my screen. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. I've got, I was telling people before, I've got year 10 English trauma going on here because as a high school student, I lost marks on an oral presentation for holding my notes too close to my face. From total trauma. So for those who don't know, I identify as blind with just enough vision to be dangerous. And yeah, A11y, as Ash mentioned, and I thought I'd start by just telling you what that is because that actually tells you why I'm actually talking about multi-factor authentication. So we do market research and experience research with people with disabilities and their support networks. We've got a panel of just over 1,200 of those people now. And a lot of our research it's all experience-based. So it's user experience. So a lot of this is not necessarily any technical accessibility. This is what it's actually like for people. And the reason we started it is on the next slide. So we do lots of research and surveys, and people, a lot of it's to do with the digital world because it's one of the barriers for a lot of people is the digital world. And so we asked a lot about, and we kept hearing about speed humps and the barriers and the difficulties that people have. And MFA and authentication journeys are a really, really big part of that and a universal pain point. They're also a universal pain point for people with what disabilities? So I'm pretty sure this is going to be relevant to you, whether we're talking about accessibility, capital A, little a, or just general good design. So we're asking which methods were least accessible, any of them working well, how do people manage authentication in daily life, and what design decisions are making things worse or better. Oh, amazing. I think we've done this before. So the demographics, we did in-depth interviews for this particular piece of research. So 23 people, 16 women, 7 men, 1 non-binary, 18 people with disability, 3 family or carers, and 2 support workers, 12 with 1 identified disability, and 11 with 2 or more identified disabilities. Interesting fact is that 35% plus of the people in our database identify with 2 or more disabilities. So it's actually quite a large number of people who have multiple things that are impacting their use of technology. One of the things we asked about was device usage, and it's kind of everything, as you'd probably expect. A lot of laptop users, iPhone users, but, you know, a little bit of everything. There's even someone in there with like a Windows phone, but then also a feature phone. So, you know, not everyone's using a smartphone for everything as well, which is obviously quite a barrier to a lot of authentication journeys. That's what that is, a feature phone. Feature phone. Yes, because the word dumb isn't really appropriate. We're still on the same one. There are some quotes on here that I'm not going to read. So if you can't read them, I'll send you the presentation later. Yeah. It's not accessible. I didn't make it accessible for myself. I was actually referring to people who can't see rather than people who can't read. But there could be both. Right. Assistive tech, we also asked about. There's a whole list here, right? There's a whole list of things that people use, and I literally just copied and pasted them all in because what people think is assistive tech, when you ask someone what assistive tech do you use in daily life, you know, they say different things. So it's just a really long list of things. And then in terms of the journeys, we're really just talking about authentication. So we ask people what they do and use MFA for. And like I said, the MFA journey is very much the authentication journey. So people don't necessarily separate them. People think capture is two-factor authentication is authentication, right? So any speed hump to me getting into my stuff is MFA. Anything you're doing to make it hard, people think is MFA. But most people identified MyGov, NDIS and Centrelink, banking and financial services, particularly the known banks. PayPal got a lot of mention. I didn't know people were using PayPal quite so much, but I mean, I'm not. This is exactly why you do research, because I don't use it. But a lot of people are using PayPal all the time. And then it came to shopping, work and study, and email. And so what did we hear from everyday experiences? We heard a lot of MFA has stopped me from doing things. We heard a lot of I put off doing things because of a lack of MFA access. And that means it's just too hard in the moment. I don't have the energy to do it. It takes longer and is more complex for people with disabilities. I have to share sensitive information to make it work. That is a really big privacy concern. And for some of our people, they know it's illegal, or it's, you know, the bank's not going to cover you. You share, you know, it's in their terms and conditions. The bank's not going to cover you if you do that, apparently, but people aren't given a choice. If they want to participate, they have to share that information. It's mentally overwhelming and there's no consistency. So the diverse experiences, the difference between MyGov and logging into your bank is so significant. People are having to learn processes for every single one of them. It's like it's an intelligence test or a test of your willpower just to do that. But we did also hear generally that people get it. And so we get this really interesting utility, accessibility, usability thing where people go, I don't have a choice, therefore I put up with it. And that's a really crappy way to design anything, is, you know, people have to use it, so it doesn't matter how good it is. And we heard a lot about that. Other things that we heard are, I'll go elsewhere if I can't get easy access, including the basics aren't accessible. If it's not an I have to use you and you've made it hard in the sign-up process, I will go somewhere else. I've been scammed. I can't believe how many people have been scammed. But you know what? The scammers keep doing it, so obviously they're winning, right? Like that positive reinforcement, they're doing it because it works. Don't assume everyone has a locked device. So this comes up for a lot of people with disabilities who are handing their device over, or, you know, we've got one participant who has to have a carer monitor their oxygen levels overnight. That device can't be locked to do that. Locked with particularly with biometrics. So they need to have that constantly available. So devices aren't automatically locked, because a lot of people, the locked device is another barrier that they have to get over every time they want to access their phone or their laptop. Don't assume everyone has the same ID documents. This goes back to just the authentication and signing up for things in the first place. ID is a barrier for a lot of people with disability. And if you make it extra hard for me to authenticate myself, people miss out on those experiences, or in turn, they actually have to pay. So they have to physically front up somewhere, which is not just the nice digital journey that the person with a passport and a driver's license has. It's an extra burden, it's extra effort, it's extra complexity to front up and prove that you're human and who you are. And if anything breaks in the flow, anything breaks in an authentication flow, the whole process falls apart. So rainy days, there are lots of rainy days when you're authenticating and things just fall apart. Those backup systems are not designed well and are not designed for success, particularly when the thing is you want to do it now, right? Most of the backup systems are logging tickets, waiting on the phone, whatever it is, it's not now. So we took a look at specific methods. We looked at SMS, email, authenticator apps, voice calls, push notifications, biometrics. People also mentioned physical tokens, magic links, and secret questions. So, SMS. We'll go through these relatively quickly. I can send you this stuff. I'll just give you the anecdotes on each of these because I think that's the most interesting part. The headline here, the actual takeaway is choice is the most important thing when it comes to methods, because not every disability and not every person with a disability wants to use the same method of authentication. Choice is the top of the design principles for MFA. So SMS. Now the SMS experience, we've got some guidelines later about how to actually design your SMS, particularly put the code first. Screen reader users do not want to listen to the "don't share this code, your security is important to us, never tell anyone this, if you need help go to this link, oh, and by the way, here's your code." People don't want that. Put it first. People don't want that information anyway because, you know, no one's reading it. It actually goes the same for the emails. Just send me the code. It's fine. I'm not telling anyone. So yeah, SMS, least worst option for most people. This one actually had the most positive comments. So of all the commentary on all the methods, the most flagged positive was SMS, which is interesting because a lot of people are moving away from SMS for their authentication because you do it in app now. So interesting. Emails next. A lot of what we heard was about where I am and where my device is and what I'm using now, and then having to switch devices. So we got a lot about switching devices. Email is definitely preferred when people are already there and they're already using it. It's already part of their routine. But emails can be really unreliable and slow. So unless I've got an expectation that that email is right there, it's coming in now, it gets frustrating. And people will do it multiple times. They will think it's failed. And so it doesn't turn out to be one of the reliable ones compared to SMS. Very rarely do you wait for an SMS. Definitely vision-related barriers were a big one. Emails that are poorly structured and are just not accessible. I mean, fix that. But one of the interesting things is our vision-impaired cohort were people who really wanted to use two devices or two methods, two things, rather than having it all on the same device. Because switching between devices, if you're authenticating on your mobile and you get an email come in with the code on your laptop, you don't have to leave the thing you're doing on your mobile. You don't have to switch apps. You don't have to do anything else. You can get that email and type it in. There's also people who do this by phone as well, but they want to use their home phone to get the code and their mobile to enter it for a voice call version. So people with vision impairments, and same vice versa. So if you're on your computer and you need to enter a code, you want it on your phone so that you don't have to leave the journey to enter that code. Whereas plenty of other people don't want to have to pick up a second device. They're like, I'm doing it here. One particular person said it's a lot of effort. My phone's on charge a lot and it's not near me, and the effort to get up and do it will stop me from that journey. So if it comes in on her mobile, she's actually not going to do it because of the effort to go and get the phone. Choice and control, choice and control. Authenticator apps, this is my favourite. Nobody likes them. Nobody likes them. So they're perceived as the hardest method. Their navigation interface, all pain points. They're stressful, they're timed, they often don't differentiate. So I didn't include any screenshots, but if you've used any of them recently and you have multiple things in the same Authenticator app, it can be really hard to tell which is which, because the numbers you have to enter are big, but what account it is isn't. It can be very easy to translate those things. And generally, the notifications and the setup of this can be super complex as well. I actually went to log into something the other day that gave me a QR code to do that with, and it took me time to find the app, then time to figure out where I can scan a QR code from. And by the time I'd gotten through that process, I think it would have been less than 2 minutes. It had timed out already. It went, no, this isn't valid anymore. I'm like, how can it not be valid anymore? Not popular, although the interesting thing is some people said they do use it for their passwords, so password keepers, but I've noticed the Microsoft one is stopped doing that now, or is about to stop doing that. You're going to have to download Microsoft Edge. Of course, everyone wants to do that. Sorry, there's no Microsoft here, is there? Sorry, Microsoft. Love you lots. Not really. All right, in-app push notifications. When it works, it feels seamless. Navigation and visual layout still matter, and it still relies on having the right device. What we found is people are confused where that notification is going to go and where is it. So an SMS, your SMS apps are likely to be in your most used. They're your most accessible apps. No one's keeping all the other things that are going to send you a random code in the same place. And so what happens is, particularly if devices are locked, those notifications might come up on a lock screen. You have to unlock your device, which is one barrier already. You then have to figure out where that notification went and what you need to open. Banking, for me, I then have to re-authenticate to get into that app, to then get that notification, to get that number, to then potentially have to remember it because it's not inherent in the, the SMS automatic goes into the, I can see you're trying to log into something, here's the code we got in your SMS, that Apple does, that people love, by the way. You have to remember it, go back to find the app you were putting it in. Hopefully you got it right. If you didn't, you've got to go back to that app. Did you dismiss the notification actively? They cause a lot of confusion for people. So some better routines around how those notifications appear, how they're dismissed, how the number can be copied, are all important things for those notifications. Biometrics and passkeys. So perception is shaped by personal reliability. So people who are vision impaired really, really, really want fingerprints back. And a lot of them are holding on to old devices, particularly in the Apple ecosystem, because they've got a home button with fingerprint recognition. It's such a big thing. Face ID is hard. It's hard to get right. But like it says, personal experience shapes whether people like them or not. And also when biometrics fail, it seems to cause more problems. The backup systems for biometrics are way more convoluted than if you forget your password. A lot of the times they are not just, because you can't change your biometrics. So the backup systems also aren't good. All right, the next one is just about that two-device thing I mentioned. So features are for some, a flaw for others, as I said. Switching devices can be that challenge. So yeah, a bit on two devices. And then a lot of questions about why do we need MFA? Coles, I'm looking at you because you came up, sorry. You came up for me too. What are we protecting? What are we protecting? And this is also something that is about understanding. So help people understand what you're protecting with your multi-factor authentication. Because people are going, well, my rewards points don't need to be protected. Well, the thing is, for me, my grocery purchases are protected anyway, because you can't use my stored credit card because that has to be authenticated when I use it as well. So, you know, so the risk and actually putting more effort, the advice here is actually putting more effort into layering your authentication. Okay, if I want to change my address on my energy account, sure, make that an authenticated journey. But I can tell you, no one else wants to pay my bill. I shouldn't have to authenticate multiple ways to pay my bill because no one else is doing that for me. So what's at risk in paying my bill?
Context is key.
Context is king.
Concern around privacy more globally, and the fact that there are so many changing landscapes on one's personal information, very sensitive personal information. It's actually not something concern around it.
Potentially, but also the user doesn't necessarily understand the risks that the provider's actually dealing with. Help me understand why you need to protect me in this way when I'm setting it up.
Oh, yeah, that give me the choice to decide how much I want that or not. Because some people might go, I have a situation where it's like, I'd rather have a PDF sent to me with a bill or something like that versus having to log into something.
To find my bill, yeah.
Find the bill, and it's like, give me the choice of
yes.
that security.
And don't charge me extra to have it sent to me by email. Looking at you, Telstra.
The Australian privacy laws are under review, expected to actually be enforced at a high standard. So we are reviewing our privacy standards in relation to that, as well as GDPR, as well as everything else. So we're thinking we need to go to the next level, which probably doesn't take any of this into account.
Probably doesn't. They didn't ask me. All right, let's move to a couple of other bits. Passwords, not MFA, but still a significant pain point. People are really, really, really bad at passwords, generally, right? This is not people with disability specifically, but when you add the context of disability, it's just grows and grows in its complexity and its level of difficulty. People are using the same ones. They're using slight modifications of them and can't remember which one they used where. Yeah, it's just all sorts of, some people are using password keepers, some people aren't. Some people are still writing them down. It's everything. Capture, once again, not MFA, but people think it is. I mentioned this last week. Looking at you, Microsoft. Why do I need a capture to log into a Teams meeting? Not cool. VicGov, that's who does it. And the normalisation of sharing sensitive information. This is one that really came out for a lot of people. Reading or entering PINs, confirming codes, handing over devices or credit cards, and letting others manage account access entirely. It's kind of normalised that someone will have access because you can't independently do some of these things. Interesting aside, it's actually back on the authenticator one, but we've got someone who, we interviewed someone who has small hands, limited dexterity and limited arm movement, and is challenged because her laptop, her work laptop, doesn't have a keypad. It only has the numbers across the top. And it's a Mac which has quite a large touch pad. And so it's even further to get to the numbers. And she swears that all her codes in the authenticator come up at 6 to 0 when 1 to 5 is easier for her to reach. That's absolutely confirmation bias, I'm sure, but she's convinced they're the hardest ones to reach, and therefore that's her biggest challenge. She's said millimeters matter, but they're not things that I've ever thought about or ever been challenged by in entering a number or a code. But the longer you make those codes, the more stressful it is entering those codes, the harder it is for people like her to actually access their accounts. All right, minimum standards. I'll finish here because I think I'm taking up too much time, right? So this is the more specific by type stuff. So SMS, code first in the message, 6 digits or fewer, minimal text, easily copied and pasted, compatible with autofill tools. People love autofill tools. I mean, I know I do. So good. Email, code appears first, content after, no unnecessary formatting, and actually gets delivered. The delivery of reliability was a big thing for email. Authenticator apps only send notifications when the screen is unlocked. So if you tell someone to go to their device and unlock it, then you send them a notification. They don't have to then go looking for it. Notifications should not disappear before being confirmed in some way. Push, once again, displaying them when the screen is unlocked so people know where to get them and staying visible. Voice calls, we didn't actually talk about the detail of voice calls. Not many people use them and not many people know they're available because they're not available very often. But they're quite good when you can. So make the option available and don't rush them. So some of them will read the code to you twice and then hang up on you. So the idea is you just keep saying it until I'm done, until the thing worked. Passkeys and biometrics, absolutely reinstate the fingerprint where you can and good backups when they fail. Secret questions, include them as alternatives because lots of people like that way that information is theirs and they get to choose what that information is. It's a really good way to provide people with choice about what they're doing. Magic links, make them available as an option, especially for that low risk stuff. So magic links can be quite good. The only time they don't work as well is when they open in-app browsers. So that's just a pitfall for magic links. The next few slides are really just the principles. So start with choice and control. There's some design recommendations. We can just go through these quickly. We know that choice and control is absolutely the place to start. Number 2 is respect single device usage. Don't assume that someone A has a second device or 2 can easily manage it. But once again, it comes down to that choice in the first place. Only use MFA when necessary. Speaks for itself. Design for independence. If someone has to hand over their password, device or PIN to another person, the system has failed. You can't always control what people do, but if you make that as easy for them as possible, you're designing for their own independence. Make it predictable, generous and forgiving. Be nice. Be good design people, accessibility people. Be nice to people. Give them time to do stuff. Be predictable. Come up with some sort of consistent way of doing things. Offer an accessible fallback that isn't going to take an extra day or 2 days or whatever to get a reply. Be consistent and set standards. So your rainy day scenarios need to be fixed and people need to know what to expect. And then the last line is really, we started with security should never come at the cost of accessibility, but this week is Privacy Week and accessibility should never come at the cost of privacy. That's it. Done. And the QR code on the screen, you can book a catch up with me and say hi.
Some great pearls of wisdom there, Kelly. I'm off to Google how many features a feature phone has. And the TLDR is basically Microsoft's annoying. That's what I took away. No, really, really great insights. Thanks, Kel. We didn't introduce Velvet, but here she is. She's about to take the stage and do her own presentation.
She needs the applause.
She heard the applause. She couldn't help herself. Does anyone, I might just, since sounds like we have some questions, I might do a Q&A as the speakers finish. So any questions for Kel?
Hi, Kelly. I was just wondering if you were going to make that research publicly available, if not, that's totally fine. I just was curious.
Yes. So
Yay.
This was done by Melbourne for Melbourne, so this wasn't client-based research. And because of that, it will be published and we'll have a look at some of those standards and things. But I'm also happy to come and do another engaging presentation to your teams if they want it.
Beauty. Anyone else? Questions for Kel?
Kelly, with that secret question insight you were getting, was there any differentiation between, because I came across this the other day about allowing the user to define what secret question they want versus the, oh, here's 6 options you have to go through and choose one of these 6 options, and then hopefully one of them actually is relevant to you. Did you get much feedback on that?
Let me write my question because they're quirky and I know the answer.
Yeah.
We actually did have one user who had 5 questions set. We had one user who had 5 possible questions in their set of secret questions. I think that might have been a MyGov thing at some point, may still be, but for some reason they can't tell what the question is, so they just guess one of 5 answers because they actually don't have an opportunity to know what the question is for some accessibility reason. We didn't dig into that further, but they actually just got one of those questions. But yes, choice about what the question is, because people can put all sorts of things that mean something to them. Not everyone knows their mother's maiden name or their grandmother's maiden name. I think I saw that one the other day.
How to spell it?
Consistently.
More of a comment than a question. If anyone banks at a particular yellow bank,
Which bank?
which bank? Can't quite recall, but you may be familiar with the net code that you get sent when you're shopping online and things like that. Maybe in your future, the net code is being phased out in favor of an app notification.
It's great for coal.
I know I get the net code every time I shop at Coles.
Me too.
Yeah. So you won't have to do a copy paste of a 6-digit code. You'll just have to go to the app and acknowledge the notification, and that is your authentication done.
Thank you. Thank you.
I believe. Cannot confirm.
That's great for coal. And Lego, by the way. Lego did that thing. Yeah.
Amazing. Any last questions for Kel?
I don't know, it's a question I had. Like, I've seen an MFA that does, like, you know how when you log in, you put in your email, put your password, but then I've seen one scenario where it would like not give you an SMS immediately. They force you to press a button to be like, send me SMS, then you'll get it. Thoughts on that?
So thoughts on that are, if you are giving me the choice of what to do at that point, fine. But if you're only giving me one option, it doesn't matter. Having said that, we do have people for whom it often doesn't work. And that's where those fallbacks are really important, because someone then wants to put their support worker's number in so that they can get it because it's not working on theirs and all that kind of stuff. But if you're doing that and it's a choice, sometimes it's SMS or voice call. I had one of those this morning, literally SMS or voice call. I get having to pick. But if you're not giving me a choice, why are you making me click something else? So much more effort.
Are you finished with that? I mean, we're here all night. Okay, thanks, Kel. Appreciate it. Our second awesome speaker for this evening is Nathan Ortiz. And Nathan is a DevOps engineer, have I got that right?
Ooh,
yes,
yep.
At Red Door Interactive, and will be speaking to us about, well, it looks like your presentation has changed title a little bit, so I'm going to read from the screen. Between form fields in real life, a trans perspective on digital accessibility and identity. Amazing.
Thank you. Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Nathan. Oh, thank you. Cool. Perfect. All right. No, I tried that. I felt like an infomercial kind of, and I was like, I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling it. So not going to do that. Yeah, cool. Hard follow-up. I'm probably not as funny as Kelly, so I'm sorry in advance. But yeah, I'm Nathan. I'm a DevOps engineer for a marketing agency in the States. but I am open to other opportunities. So just put it out there, a little shameless. All right, so yeah. I changed the title. It's going to be the same content, but I wanted to clarify that one, I'm not coming in here trying to pretend like I've got all the answers. This is a conversation that's really just scratching the surface, right? This hasn't been talked about a lot. So that, and then also some of the information in here is going to be coming from a lived experience of me being a trans person and navigating the web, being so. And then also having some conversations with, friends and others in the community who have also kind of run into these sorts of barriers. So, of course, again, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to elders past and present. I also acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. So a bit of an outline. First, I'm going to cover an intro, go over some terminology that some of us may or may not know that we will be talking about throughout the presentation. And then I'm going to cover three main concepts. The first one is going to be about decoupling sex and gender and why that is so critical to, creating inclusive experiences for trans and intersex communities. And then the second is going to be the freedom to self-identify, what that really means. And then the third is going to be around using some caution when we are dealing with user-facing data. And then at the end, some questions that I may or may not be able to answer, but I will try my best. So introduction to gender diversity, intersex, and accessibility. So first off, let's talk about sex. So sex, scientifically, is referring to the biological and physiological characteristics of people. So the terms that are often used with that are going to be male, female, and intersex. So with intersex, these are considered natural variations that happen at birth. And these are referring to traits that don't typically fall within the male and the female binary sex categories. Gender, when I'm talking about gender, that's going to be more of an identity, right? It's going to be socially constructed characteristics. Terms for that can include man, woman, non-binary, and so forth. So when I say cisgender or cis, I'm going to be referring to somebody whose gender matches the sex that they were assigned at birth. So most people are cis. The opposite of that is going to be transgender or trans, which is somebody whose gender does not align with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So for instance, that's going to be me, right? I was born female sex, but I am a trans man. So with non-binary, that's going to be talking about gender that is not constrained to the kind of typical binary of what a man or woman is. And then when I say gender diverse, I'm really using that as a sort of umbrella term to kind of talk about all the various types of genders. So when we talk about this sort of thing, I think it's really important to go over the history. I am a hot topic in 2025. I think it's important to say that trans people, intersex people, we have been documented in history as early as 5000 BCE. There's been studies done that has found that prior to European colonization, there was actually no two-gender system that was put in place, right? So there were third genders. There was a lot of diversity in fluidity, right? Especially in indigenous cultures that we've seen, and a lot of those community members were seen as highly respected, valued, even sacred members, right, of their communities. So they held positions such as leaders, mediators, healers, and so forth. So we didn't really, unfortunately, start seeing that sort of demonization and seeing, trans, intersex people as kind of a pathological thing until later on. So I want to talk about gender dysphoria before we really get into it. So what is gender dysphoria? That's referring to the psychological distress that may sometimes result when somebody's gender does not align with the sex assigned at birth. And that is a diagnosis in the DSM-5, I believe. It's really important to understand that not all trans people experience this. You can be trans and not have gender dysphoria, and that's completely valid. So in that, it's really important to clarify that being trans is not a disability. It is not a medical condition, and I want that to be very clear, right? So when it comes to gender dysphoria, there are some treatments that do involve gender affirming care. And when I say that, and when most people hear that, they think about, oh, medical surgery, right? Testosterone, estrogen, surgery, all that sorts of things. When in reality, that's just one kind of portion of what gender affirming care is. A lot of people decide to not even go that route. On the other hand, there is a kind of a social domain, right, that involves gender affirming care, and that's things like pronoun changes and name changes, and that can even be, changing the types of clothes that you decide to wear. So why am I talking about gender dysphoria? So I know I'm from the States, so this is a little bit US based, right? But a few years ago, a federal court actually ruled that gender dysphoria is protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it is possible that it does fall within the scope of the Australian Disability Discrimination Act. I haven't, heard of any cases yet so far, but it is possible, right? If it is significant enough. So there is no existing standards that are related to gender dysphoria, right? In fact, the only thing I've really found when it comes to WCAG is the taxonomy system that they use with the input purposes for user interface components, and they actually direct to use the sex attribute, which maps to gender identity. And we're going to look at why that is, possibly one of the worst things that you can really do when it comes to designing, inclusive and accessible experiences. So a little bit of the user impact. On one hand, there's a lot of emotional distress that can occur, right? There are a lot of common design approaches that can, trigger gender dysphoria for people. There's a lot of repetitive misgendering, dead naming, and invalidation that happens. And by the way, misgendering is referring to somebody at the gender that is not correct for them, right? That would be somebody calling me a woman. You better not. So, and then dead naming is going to be referring to somebody who's, a past name that they've used. Some people don't really like that term anymore. You could say misnaming, but personally, I will use dead naming because I don't know her. So there's a lot of confusion and frustration, right, that can come with these experiences, and even compromised safety. Personally, I used to work at a grocery store, right, and the system that they used to kind of print out the roster for each shift did not have a way to easily update the names, right? And a lot of people's legal name does not match the name that they identify with. So the managers would have to go in and manually update the names. And what does that mean? That means that a few times it was missed. And so the roster would be printed, just kind of slapped on the wall for everybody to see. And it resulted in a few very uncomfortable conversations that I did not want to have. I never consented to having with other people that happened. So luckily, my safety was not compromised, but that's not the case for a lot of other people. So we end up with other situations just as, like how we're addressed, right? I've gotten dear Miss Nathan, like an infinite amount of times, or welcome, dead name, right? Even profile avatars that are kind of automatically generated based off of my sex data that doesn't even, look close to being like me. Well, I'm trying to grow my hair out of it, so maybe, but yeah. And then on the other hand, right, there is a very real issue of an inability to access some service or product, right? When we talk about like rule-based content, there is usually a condition that needs to be met in order to access that, right? So a service that might not be available for a particular gender. I have also experienced that where I signed up for a telehealth app, right? Because I needed a certain like medical service. I spent like 30 minutes, filling out all the forms that they asked for. And then they finally get to the question where it's like, oh, enter your sex. And most people, they see that question, boom, they know, right? A lot of people like me, we see that question and we stare at it for 10 minutes because I don't know. I don't know what I need to put. Do I put my biological sex, especially if this is medically related, or do I need to put my legal sex because I did update my ID? Well, I don't want to fail the identity verification. I want the service. So I put down male, right? And I continue on. Later down the line, I try to request the service and then an error message pops up and it says, hey, this service is not available for your gender. I'm like, are you serious? And it's, I think a lot of us know what the support is like for those sorts of apps, right? It's like, oh, here's a number, call this number, and I'm like, so you want me to call this number, explain to them that I'm a trans person, have to kind of disclose that information even more? Or the other choice is maybe go back, redo the whole process, and put that I'm female and hope that maybe even though it doesn't match my ID, I can get through. So those are the kind of choices that we're faced with in this community. So the first concept is going to be decoupling sex and gender. I've noticed, especially here in Australia, there's a lot of, they see sex and gender as kind of, interchangeable. They're one thing. When, realistically, they are actually two separate concepts. So with sex, again, we're talking about different biological, physiological characteristics, right? So we're talking hormones, reproduction, chromosomes, things like that. But then with gender, that's going to be the identity, a socially constructed characteristics, right? So when we say that, we're talking about behaviors, roles, expressions that are, typical in society, what that means. Yeah, why? Oh yeah, no, I would love to know.
Because if you put sex on a form, everyone writes yes, please. Well, they have to put gender when they mean sex.
Oh, okay. That is good to know. Thank you. But yeah, yeah, I believe it. Yeah. Oh. I'm learning so much as an American. Yeah, but reality, both of them, right? Sex and gender, they exist on spectrums, both of them, right? But they're not the same spectrum. A lot of the times they don't align, and I'm physical proof of that. Trans people, intersex people are proof of that. So it's especially important we pay attention to gender and sex terms, right? So sex terms, male, female, intersex, right? Those don't belong on forms that ask you what your gender is, okay? Those belong on forms that ask you what your sex is. The terms that belong on forms that ask what your gender is are man, women, possibly trans man, cis man, etc. Two-spirit. In fact, there are a lot of different genders. I believe Tinder has like 37, but you don't need to worry about that right now, okay? So if anything, just leave off male, female, yeah. So Tinder. Yeah, don't worry about Tinder. Okay, so like when sex is misused, right? Instead of when gender really should be used. First of all, to be honest, asking someone sex is a super uncomfortable question. Because like I said before, most people might see it and think, oh yeah, like sure, whatever, male, female. I see it, and my reaction is, why do you want to know what my body parts are? Like, why do you want to know my biology, what I was born with? Like, that's none of your business. And actually, it's like, it feels like a very kind of severe invasion of privacy when you ask me. Don't ask me that unless you actually have to ask me that, right? Medical situations, legal situations, sure. But if I'm signing up for your blog, come on, right? So yeah, immediately that creates a lot of confusion to what is, what data is needed. I know a lot of people too in my community know that when people ask for sex, you probably want gender, right? But we also don't know. We're not sure. It creates this kind of confusion and, what do I do? What do I do, right? And that comes the 10 minutes of staring at it. So the other thing, government documents still use the term sex to collect that gender data, right? So when you go off and you maybe amend your records, your ID, birth certificate, you're looking at a whole nother situation of, okay, what do we do? What do we do? Right? So there's a lot of issues when it comes to identity verification, especially medical situations. So worst cases, we might be unable to access that service or product at all. Discrimination can occur in the identity verification. I've also gotten this. I tried to access my bank details and the guy literally said, oh, well, you got all of your other, information right that I confirmed, but he said, you just don't sound like you should. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like, I'm trans. And he was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So that was how that went, right? But it's such an awkward, weird conversation to have. So on top of that, right, those are kind of the more severe things, right? But then there's also this kind of underlying consistent misgendering that happens on a daily basis, especially when your records aren't updated. And those come in the forms of like spam, emails, newsletters. So it's like, I don't really know how to explain the feeling of being invalidated by tech. You know, it's one thing to have it done by a person. It's another thing to have, you know, a heading level 1. You know what I mean? Invalidate who you are. So it's a whole nother beast, right? So really, ultimately, it's a very poor user experience, right? Some people experience a lot of distress, especially when it stacks up every single day, right? Some people abandon the website or the app altogether. I've done that a few times. I've gotten to a point where I'm like, you know what? I'm done. I'm switching to another phone provider. I'm not using this website anymore. And then I never forget how those companies made me feel. I might not necessarily know what the experience was, but I do know that I will never go back to them. So unfortunately, the long-term effects on mental and physical well-being for these communities of people are unknown. And that's because there hasn't been enough research done and there's not enough data. We just don't know. So if you do need to ask for sex, there are a couple great ways to do that. So here I have an example of a form. There's options of female, male, and then an X for intersex. And it says, there's a tooltip that says, what is legal sex? The sex marker is listed in your health insurance or medical records for insurance matching. So immediately, the first thing they do is they clarify the information needed. I'm like, oh, okay, I know exactly what to put here. 2, they include an option for intersex. It's like, wow, yes, intersex people do exist. So yeah, that's awesome. There's a couple other things you can maybe do, you know, include a gender field if you want to be more validating, right? It's not a comfortable question to begin with, but it's always nice to be like, hey, we still care about your gender, you know, if we have to ask for your sex. Oh yeah, of course. So intersex, so I'm not, first off, I'm not like a, you know, I'm not a specialist in any means when it comes to sex, but there are like primary, secondary sex characteristics people are born with, right? There's the chromosomes, hormones, you know, facial hair, it's considered sex characteristics, things like that. So intersex, which occurs in about 1.7% estimated of births, is when somebody is born with sex characteristics that don't typically fall within what makes someone male or female. So that looks, I mean, it varies. It's a very broad spectrum, but it could mean somebody is maybe born with, you know, male reproductive organs, but also has ovaries, right? Yeah, so it's like we don't, you know, it's very broad, it varies person by person, but it is actually considered natural variations. So it's not considered a medical condition. It's natural. It happens, and we've seen that across so many different species. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, when it comes to asking for gender, right? I feel like this question is kind of thrown onto like every single form now, and it's like, for what? Like I was talking about, like, why do you need to know my gender for a blog? And I know a lot of it comes from like, we want to collect and mine as much data as we possibly can on people. But really, if you can, you know, consider these 3 things when it comes to whether or not you should include gender on a form or not. So 1, is their behavior going to be different depending on their gender? So a good example is the Bumble dating app, right? Only women can make that first move to message the person. In that case, yeah, absolutely. You should know someone's gender. 2, will somebody's gender affect their experience with the product? So cool example here would be anybody who uses menstrual products who not, you know, cis women. And if you know the Always brand that does provide menstrual products, they actually used to have the Venus symbol on their packaging. They ended up removing it a few years back because they got a lot of feedback from non-binary people, other people who did not identify as cis women who said, hey, this doesn't represent us, define us. We feel a bit uncomfortable having to buy the products with this. And they actually listened, so that was super cool. And then 3, is this data meaningful? You know, do you really need to know somebody's gender? Is it relevant to whatever you're designing, right? And the reason we want to consider these things is because collecting gender, right, there's risks when it comes to that. There has been studies shown that workplace discrimination goes up when we do collect gender, especially when, the wrong people get their hands on that data, such as recruiters, right? And then on the other hand, there is, in this day and age, the safety of trans people, right? Having that data out there on them, like, most people I know would they don't assume that I'm trans when they see me, right? A lot of people keep those things private. So there are definitely risks. So if you do need to ask for gender, there is a really good way to do that as well. So here I have a form asking gender, and then there's options of women, man, non-binary, rather not say, and type in. So the first really great thing that's done is that they're using gender terms, right? There is no sex terms in here at all. There's also checkboxes for multiple selections because people can identify as more than one thing, right? So women and non-binary at the same time as an identity is very possible. You can also allow users to opt out if they're not comfortable in sharing that information. And then custom fields for genders not listed is also really great because, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of genders out there that do exist. And there are pros and cons to that. I won't really go into it too much, what those pros and cons are, but if you are interested, definitely research that a bit. So when it comes to the type and option as well, you want to consider how your data is collected, what you're doing with that data, and how you need to work with that data because it can become, potentially more difficult to deal with later on. Okay, so that goes, decoupling sex and gender, pulling those things apart. And the second concept I want to talk about is the freedom to self-identify. So there are some core identity markers, right? There is name, pronouns, prefix, and title. So these things typically, for a lot of trans people, they tend to change, right, during their journey. And when it comes to name, that is a very common kind of early step approach when it comes to gender affirming care. Some people might try on different names within their social groups to find one that does resonate with who they are. So that being said, there's also a process to do a legal name change, right? Depending on where you are in the world, that legal name change process might not even be possible, right? It might be considered illegal. You can't have it done. If it is legal, it's usually a very long, expensive process that you have to go through. I think for me, it was like almost $500 US dollars, and it took months, right? And it was such a pain. So that being said, it's really important that we understand that there's a lot of trans users that are navigating the web with a name that they identify with that does not match their legal name on their IDs. And when we have forms that are only requesting legal name, or they're using that legal name to, kind of auto-generate those greetings based on legal name, right? They're really opening up the door for lots of, misgenderings and dead naming and things like that, creating those sorts of, really painful experiences. So there's also, with identity verification, as I mentioned before, it can really potentially exclude millions. LinkedIn alone, there's about 3.3 million LinkedIn users that identify as trans or non-binary. And I believe, and again, these are North American statistics, but I believe only 24% of trans people have actually legally updated their records. So that's millions of people who cannot get their LinkedIn's verified, right? There have been cases of people who have had their LinkedIn accounts banned because they're using their name that does not match their ID. And this has been a conversation going on for years. So what do we do when someone's legal name and name does not match, right? So first, again, we don't ever want to assume that the user identifies with a legal or birth name, right? We never want to use that legal name to greet or address somebody without their consent, right? A really great thing we can do is use clear labels, right? What is the difference between legal name and name on a form? One of the best things you can do, provide an alternative name field. You can do name if different from legal name, right? I would advise avoiding nickname. I have seen this a little bit too. Nickname can be seen as a bit offensive, It's like saying, Nate is a nickname for Nathan, right? Nathan is not a nickname for what my old name was. That's just my name. And then again, designate a display name, give somebody the choice how they want to be greeted. So a really great example of putting a name on forms. So with Folks Health, there's a form here and they have 2 fields at the top, first name and last name. And this is their alternative name field. But the really cool thing is that it actually comes before the legal name fields. So in this case, that's them telling you like, hey, we respect your identity. We care about who you are. So please tell us who you are, even if it doesn't match your legal name. And then they provide legal name fields afterwards. And then they have a checkbox here too that you can select if your first name and last name already matches your legal name. So, you know, avoiding redundant entry of information as well. So this is a really great example here. And then of course, tooltips as well for clarifying that sort of information that's needed. So pronouns are also something that typically tends to change. If your website or application involves people that are going to be referring to each other in one way or another, you definitely want to include pronouns. So on the left, we have a form that's got different checkboxes. Again, these are multiple select checkboxes, which are great because people can have several different pronouns. On the right is taken from LinkedIn, and this shows a custom type-in field as well that allows for custom pronouns because again, I promise you, you are not going to be able to put all the pronouns that exist out there, right? And if you're wondering why, that's because, you know, a lot of pronouns come from other cultures, right? When we think like pronouns, a lot of it typically, what we think of comes from the English language. So it's about respecting those identities, respecting those other cultures. And then down here too, another advisory warning, I would avoid preferred pronouns. And the reason why this phrase is not typically seen as great is because it's like saying, hey, I've got pronouns, you have a choice. You can use these ones, but I prefer these ones, when that's not the case. My pronouns are he, him. There is no preference. That's what it is. So then prefixes, this is another thing. I haven't really seen this too much lately, right? But I have seen it more in like hospitality industry where they really want to, you know, be professional. So when it comes to prefixes, one, don't make it required because there will be missing options, I'm sure. And what happens is users end up being forced to be addressed a way that they don't feel comfortable with or they don't identify with. So, you know, you can make it optional if you really do want to have it. Personally, I think you can rethink the field. Is it really necessary to have, right? If so, then you can allow a custom option or especially allow for future editing. So don't lock your users into being addressed a certain way that they don't want to be in the future. So that brings us to our final concept, which is around caution with user-facing data. So when user-facing data includes things about identity, such as name, sex, right? It can create that distress, that gender dysphoria that I talked about before, especially when here on the left, you know, we've got an example where this was taken from a health profile account. And it's like every time I had to log in to go edit anything or do anything, this was the first thing that I saw. Is it saying like, oh, 28-year-old female? And I think it's so silly because it's like, I'm not going to forget. Like, I don't know who's out there like, oh, I don't know what my own, you know, sex is. So it's, yeah, I know what my name is. I know what my, exactly. Yeah, and my age. Yeah, your age. It's like, come on, really? Is it really necessary? So in this case, it's like, I really think there's ways that you can avoid that obvious placement for that sort of data, right? I don't think you need to show it to the user every single time. So on the right is an example from this kind of ticketing checkout service. And they have this little kind of text here that says date of birth and gender on file. And I thought that was super cool to see because I'm like, oh, wow. You can put that data there and say, hey, it's on file somewhere. We're not going to show it to you immediately, but being able to kind of add that functionality to easily show and hide that information, you know, that can make a pretty big difference. You know, I think it's like forcing, you know, not forcing the users to have to see it every single time if it makes them uncomfortable. It was, yes, yep. The left one, I can't because like I said, I blocked that company out of my mind completely. Yeah, it was one of those kind of telehealth. I think it might have started with a K or something. Yeah, maybe K Health is, no, if it's not them, then. But yeah, definitely right. So yeah, closing thoughts and summary. Gender diverse intersex people, we've always existed. We will continue to do so despite the legislation that comes forward, right? I really feel that these communities deserve to be included in the conversation when it comes to accessibility. We've learned about some concepts. One of the biggest ones, if you take anything away from this presentation, it's that sex and gender are not the same, and they really should not be used interchangeably. And even if that's the one thing that you change, that will make such a massive difference in the experiences that trans and intersex people experience. So we looked at also some core identity markers and how those kind of tend to change with people's journey, right? Allowing the people to, the freedom to tell you who they are versus you telling them, hey, this is who you are, right? It's a completely different experience. And then we looked at why we should be cautious surrounding user-facing data. And I do want to close with, there's a lot more research that definitely needs to be done. There's like nothing. There's nothing out there. I have not really seen this talked about anywhere. I'm not a researcher. I don't have that skill set. I wish I was, because I would get started on this stuff, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now when it comes to this. Any questions? Yes. Oh yeah.
Thanks again, Nathan, for that insightful knowledge to share with us. Have you noticed the maturity between the US and North America and in Australia around the decoupling of sex and gender? Have you noticed the maturity levels between the two places?
Yeah. So yes, I have noticed that in North America it was more common. Unfortunately, before the current administration, we were seeing quite a bit of progress, right? We see LinkedIn with the pronouns, Tinder, Meta, like they were starting to introduce the pronouns, and that kind of exists within the social domain of that gender affirming care, right? We were seeing all these new kind of gender fields popping up and things like that. So yeah, we were seeing some good progress there in North America, but unfortunately, we are seeing a shift backwards because of the legislation that's been introduced, the current administration in the US not wanting, they really want to codify that there's only a male and female that that exists, and that there is no like gender or anything that's like beyond that. So there was a big difference. It's hard to speak to where it is now, just because there are a lot of companies that are scaling back their efforts to really be more inclusive in that way.
Question. Okay. No, but I was like, it was okay. Okay, so I have observed that in a lot of form design, in the gender, there are 3 fields like male, female, and other. So how accurate is it for you? Like, do you reckon that while designing the form, putting the other is good enough? Is it justifying you?
So I know personally, and with some people I've talked to within the community, we don't like seeing other, because it's very othering, right? It's like, oh, you're not female or male, you're something else, right? Again, if you're going to ask for sex, like it's include intersex, you know what I mean? Like I don't know why. It's just a very easy kind of option. So yeah, I would avoid including other if you can. If you don't want to, you rather not say, or, that's fine. Yeah, but I would definitely avoid other, yeah.
Sarah.
Thank you, Nathan. I was thinking of the example you gave of the form where it had first name, last name, and then I think it had, is this the same as your legal name? And then had the option for you to fill in legal name. And I was thinking about that from a design perspective, and thinking about when we enter a postal address, often that pattern is kind of the same. If someone wasn't scanning through the form and was presented with first name, last name, and didn't sort of read down through the form to get to legal and what have you, would there be any suggested wording to, I'm just thinking about easing friction of first name, because forms are so badly designed already, you might be left thinking, well, what is this first name? Is it my legal name? Is it not my legal name? Or that without maybe clarification. And then you might fill in your legal name, get through and go, oh, and now it's asking for my legal name. I have to go back and change that. Would you have any advice for how you might sort of flag that difference, you know, at that time, just to ease the friction while still respecting what you said, which was actually asking for first name before asking for, yeah, first name, legal name if it's different.
Yeah, that's a great question. I hope I can answer it. But so I do also want to clarify when it comes to like having first name, last name, right? Legal name. There's a lot of cases where you really don't need somebody's legal name, right? A lot of the time you need legal name when it comes to, you know, more like medical situation, this and that, right? But if it's a lot of applications really don't need to know somebody's legal name. So in cases like that, it's like perfectly fine to include first name, last name. For the problem with, you know, whether somebody's scanning quickly, yeah, I don't know. Again, there's not been a lot of, you know, research that's done in that. So it's like, I don't have a good answer for that because realistically, I don't know. I don't know what is going to work best in that case, whether it's like a tooltip or a notification that says, hey, this might not be, you know, I have seen, it could be something similar to like, I have seen where a form asked for sex and they had a kind of notice that was right next to it that said, we understand that this may not align with your gender identity. So it could be something like that that says, we understand that this might not be your legal name, right? It could be something like that. But yeah, these are really, yeah, really good question that I would also, yeah, kind of love to know what the best approach is there. Yeah.
One of the challenges coming from a HR perspective is the HR systems, so the HRIS systems that we're reliant on in Australia because of Fair Work, because of legalities and things like that. And I know where I worked previously, we wanted to change the API moving from the HRIS to the LMS so that we could address people appropriately. It was in excess of $100,000 just to change that. And I think that's one of the challenges that we want to move forward, but we're reliant on these large-scale systems related to Coles. So from the same similar background. The large-scale systems actually force us to go the legal side because if there are any issues, but the reality is we actually want to know the person instead because that's a person we're addressing. So I'm not sure how to overcome that because while you've got the legal requirement the way it is in Australia, needing passports, needing this to verify identity, that actually impacts what we can put into the system. So, yeah, not sure. I think we're a bit behind, to be honest, but yeah, it's a complex thing.
Yeah, I do want to say it sounds a lot like kind of retrofitting for accessibility, you know? It's kind of like just to say, yeah, instead of building that way in the first place, we end up with those sorts of really expensive issues later on. So yeah, that is one of the big kind of issues on how we address that. Yeah, for sure.
No. You both have been wonderful this evening, Kelly and Nathan. Thank you so much for sharing. Always learn something from both of you every time I see you. So thank you. Thank you so much again. So that's it.